Right, good afternoon and welcome to K-12 Education Budget. For today, we have a lighter day, a heavy budget, but a lighter day. We just have JG today, and we also have Craig as well. If not, I am sure John could just step right up and provide K-12 testimony from the department. Reminder, if you would like to submit testimony, you still have time for the overall budget, and that is on Monday. That's February 13th. We're not in a super rush to pass out. There's Craig. We're not in a super rush to pass that out. We're going to take our time with it. So wanted to let you know that. We don't, somewhere in March, we'll work on passing it out, recommendations, that kind of thing. Other things, committee, tomorrow we have a guest speaker, Ben Scaffoldy. He is going to talk to us about outcomes and funding, so that's one item. And then the second item, we will work House Bill 2218 from yesterday. So that will keep us busy tomorrow. And then we should be good on Thursday and Friday. So enjoy the long weekend after 3:30. All right, without further ado, these items should be on the S drive. Is that right? I know we had an Adobe problem. Are they on the S drive? Yeah? Okay. Okay. Okay, which one do you have? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. JG, you're up. And to know, again, we are gonna have, I kind of like having long, short, long, and Garrett needs to get to a basketball game, so we definitely are gonna honor that. All right, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to go over the Department of Education budget analysis. I'm just going to go ahead and do a brief overview and answer the easy questions, and then the department can come up and ask all the difficult questions of them. They have all of the answers. So our budget analysis, we revised this last year, so you may not have seen very much. We tried to organize it so that the summary overview is at the first, then we get a little bit more detailed as we go forward. So if you look on the first page, has a quick description of what the Kansas State Department of Education, it's overseen by a 10-member elected Board of Education. And then they're charged with basically taking care of all schools that are under the Board of Regents. On page 2, real quick summary, the legislature approved a budget of about $6.6 billion last year. So it's the 23 approved that was based on the 2022 legislature. You'll be revising that. There were some reappropriations, a total of $5.9 million in SGF reappropriations. Reappropriation is money that was not spent in 2022, and it had language that would allow that money to move forward into 2023 without any adjustments. So no legislative action required. The agency submitted a revised budget of $6.8 billion, including $4.5 billion state general fund in 2023. It's an all funds increase of $155.3 million and an SGF increase of $1.9 million. And most of that, and we'll go over this in a little bit more detail, is around additional COVID-19 pandemic relief funding. The governor recommended for 23, $6.7 billion, about $4.4 billion from the state general fund. It's a $70.4 million increase, including $65.5 million SGF, or reduction, I'm sorry, from the estimate of the agency. And that was virtually all around funding for the consensus caseload estimates. So, in the caseload estimates, there was a reduction. Page 4, there's just a chart that lists the categories of expenditure. So this is what they're spending money on. And aid to local units, that's aid to local units of government. And those are units that have taxing authority. School districts have taxing authority, so they're under the aid to local units. Other assistance goes more to individuals or other businesses that don't have taxing authority. And then it has the financing, and the largest portion of that financing is a little over $4 billion from the state general fund. Chart at the bottom shows expenditures for operating expenditures. This is not including all of the money that goes to the school districts. And you can see where for 2023, there's a total of $19.7 million in SGF that goes to operate the department. All funds, that's about $101 million, with about 85 of that from the state general fund. And then the chart below, on the bottom of page 5, is the graph that shows the other assistance grants and state aid that will show this is the state aid portion, $4.4 billion with $4.7 billion in 24. The all funds figure, this includes all of the special revenue funds and federal funds, pop that number up to $6.6 billion in 23 and $6.7 billion in 24. The chart on page 7 is a list that starts with the approved amount by the legislature. We talked about the reappropriations. The reappropriations are all included in this. So that's what then the legislative approved amount, $4,486,000,000. The agency did make some adjustments. There's a list, items number 4 through 10 are all of the agency adjustments. There is a deduction, a lapse, a reduction of $4 million SGF for the virtual math program. It was then added back in federal funds. So there was COVID-19 money that was available. So the program's still funded at the $4 million. It's just changed the funding source. So the all funds didn't change. SGF down, other funds went up, net zero. The main portion of the additions are in 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And those are virtually all around additional COVID funding that's available. And it went directly to these type of programs and not necessarily the flexible money that comes into school districts that they can distribute otherwise. There was a reduction of 12 FTE. They have eliminated 12 positions that they've had vacant for a while and weren't planning on filling, so they just eliminated those. So the FTE went from 270 down to 258. The governor's then recommendations reflect all of the caseload or the school finance consensus estimates. It reduced 76 million SGF and about the same amount all funds for the state foundation aid. The consensus capital improvement aid dropped. That would be bond and interest, dropped about $5 million. The capital outlay, that is the equity portion, the state matching for those school districts that have that requirement. That's up about 6 million. Capers about 11 for school districts, and then it went down about 6.5 for the non-school districts. The items on page 8 and 9 are actually what those items are, with a brief description of all of those items if you want to look at those. And it's set out in the same categories: agency estimate with items 4 through 11, or 4 through 10, and then the governor's recommendations as well. We do have just a quick chart that shows the difference between what was actually spent in 2022 and what the agency's requesting in '23. And most all of that money is around funding for the caseloads or from the school finance formula and the additional federal relief money that comes in. Then we have the same chart on 2024 on page 11. It starts off with the agency's revised request. So where we ended up in '23 from the agency is 482 with a total of almost $6.8 billion. They had requested several enhancements for special ed. They had requested $76.8 million over 5 years. They asked for $1.9 million for additional professional development, a $3 million increase to provide additional mental health intervention team pilot program to expand that or to maintain it. The mentor teacher was an enhancement of $1 million, as was the safe and secure school grants. Parents as teachers was asking for $1.3 million, and they had 2 small grants that they requested $35 million each for. They asked for about $3 million in the early childhood block grant. That would go to the children's cabinet, as would the Dolly Parton Imagination Library of $1 million. And then there were other miscellaneous adjustments, reducing $150 million. A good portion of the $150 million SGF reduction was, if you recall, last year, you approved a payment to eliminate the delay. We used to pay the July payment. Instead of making it in June, we pushed it off to July, and that was about $170 million. So that would be a $170 million reduction from where it was in '23, because that payment was made then. And there was some additional federal funds that was brought in as well. The governor then made recommendations. She did change the special education state aid. The agency had asked for a little over 67 million. The governor's recommending 72 for 5 years, and that was based on the latest consensus caseload or state school finance estimates. I keep saying caseload, that's what I'm used to. School finance estimates dropped the amount that we were expecting to pay for special ed, and that was the reason for that adjustment. She did not recommend the 2 small grants for conservation and environment and ag in the classroom. The next through 19, once again, we're funding those consensus school finance estimates to reflect what the total addition of that was, and it was around close to almost $100 million. The item number 20 is something that's a little different. Going back in time, the capital improvement state aid was supposed to be, it was set up as a demand transfer. So as the agency needed money, they could write something to the Division of Accounts and Reports, and then they would make that payment, and it would show up as an SGF expenditure. For the last several years, there's been language that was included in appropriations bill that said, we're not going to include this as a demand transfer. We're going to change this to a revenue transfer. So in doing that, instead of spending it and having it come out of the state general fund, it would come out of the state general fund first. So it'd be a transfer out of the state general fund into another special revenue fund. Net effect of this is zero, no change. It's just how you're categorizing it. And what the governor's recommending here is to have it revert back to its statutory demand transfer. And I know that's a little bit confusing. Net effect of it is zero. The state general fund would show a $200 million increase but the net effect to the state general fund would be zero. So we would lose, we would gain additional revenue and show additional expenditures. So they balance out. On page 12 and 13, there are a list, once again, of a brief description of each of the enhancements. And the enhancements that were requested were granted by the governor, except for those two small grants. They did ask for some additional language to be put in the appropriation bill, and that's on the bottom of page 13. And then there's some additional requests from the Children's Cabinet that wanted to have a transfer increased from the Kansas Endowment for Youth. That's where the tobacco money is deposited in the Treasury, and then it's transferred from that into the Children's Initiative Fund for the most part. And then they wanted some no-limit fund and a 501c3 created for the Imagination Library, like it's identified in the foundation. The governor, like we said, talked through this with her staff, and they added the consensus and the enhancements that were requested. On page 16, you can see the calculation that was used for the special education state aid enhancement request to get the increase up to 92% in 2028. The governor did agree with the methodology that was used and added the adjustment or subtracted the adjustment that was made in the school finance consensus to reduce that total down to that $72 million a year. The next few pages, once again, just talk about each of those enhancements in a little bit more detail, and then identify whether the governor had recommended the enhancement or not. On page 19 is some language on the consensus process. And the largest adjustment was the decrease of $76 million below. And that was mainly, there was several items, but the weighted FTE in the schools dropped. And as that dropped, it dropped the amount of state foundation aid that would go to the school districts by a fair amount. And then the special topic on page 20 is the same process for the consensus adjustment. And what I think the saying is, what goes down goes back up. So the COVID had brought down the enrollment and some of the weightings. We had anticipated that to increase more in 23 than what they actually did. So the FTE and weighted FTE dropped. We have then the estimate going back up in 24 and in those out years as well. So when we were through with the calculations, it was about an $87 million increase to state foundation aid. And then page 21 and on, or a little bit more detail around some of the performance measures that the agencies had and the different departments. I'm sure that's a quick overview of the Department of Education budget. I'm hoping we can get out of here by 4:30 and make sure Garrett's okay.
Yes, thank you, JG. Okay, questions for JG about the budget. Do remember Craig is going to be providing some testimony here in a minute. So if it's something a little bit more specific, you might want to hold off for Craig. But if it's something that is in the report, we can ask JG. All right. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, JG, for the overview. You'd mentioned a FTEs, was it 12 or 13?
12.
And the agency had the authority to delete those FTEs?
They submitted it in their budget to be deleted, so that's showing up all the way through the process.
Okay, and I only asked that because there was a question about FTEs yesterday. Were these classified positions or unclassified positions?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I think most of the positions we have now in state government are unclassified positions.
Okay.
And most of those that are classified are in corrections. So I couldn't guarantee, but I would say that they are unclassified
I
positions.
might throw the same question at Craig. Thank you.
Any other questions? No further questions? All right, JG, you're off easy. Craig, welcome. Welcome back. And do you have any handouts for our group?
Yes, Madam Chair, I believe you received a
Just
handout.
one? Oh, I don't have that one.
I know it's a surprise, only one handout from me.
But you did bring some, or am I just stealing yours again? Okay.
And there's a second handout from the Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. But I'm going to start with the one from the agency and be reviewing the budget appeal that the State Board of Education recommended and those items that were approved by the governor. And JG touched on them a little bit. I'll try to give you a little more information, but not be up here too long for you. So we have 4 topics, more or less, that they're broken into. The state board's enhancement requests, other recommendations that were included in the governor's budget, and you've heard a little bit about those from JG. There are some miscellaneous budget issues. You also heard a little bit about those, and then COVID-19 expenditures. And I'm going to reserve the right to call on John Hess for any details that you might need to know, one of which will be the question about the personnel. So enhancement requests on the first page. You see the total list of what you're going to find through the rest of the document. And the state board is supporting the governor's recommendations regarding the agency's enhancement requests. And if you turn the page, the first one is special education services state aid. And as JG mentioned, back in July, when the board made their recommendation was to advance to 92% over a 5-year time frame. So let's phase our way up to that. And at that time, the estimate was it would take $76.8 million each year to do that, allowing for increased costs and consumer price index increases and additional staffing. In late October, when the consensus revenue estimating group met, we had a little more recent information. And so you see the table on that page now shows 72.4 million approximately. So that indicates one of the issues with making a 5-year phase in. The governor's recommendation was for FY24 to add the 72.4, and our intention certainly would be, as the years go on, that number may adjust down as it did now, or potentially up, but either way, it has to come back to be appropriated. We're looking at 1 year of a 5-year plan. And as we've discussed in this and other committees, the issue with funding special education for school districts is that both federal and state law require that those services be provided, regardless of if the money is there or not. School districts find it from other sources, being their general fund and their local option budget. And on the next page then, you see a historical table of how excess costs have been funded since 2009. And you'll see an extra little federal aid column in there. Back in 2010, 11, and 12, that was ARRA money. If you remember the recession that hit during those years, and it was specifically targeted for special education, that share of the money was. And then the more recent years are the ESSER funds, COVID-19 relief money. Again, that the state board targeted for special education, and part of it is additional federal aid that the government federal government targeted in order to offset the pandemic's effects. So again, 5-year phase-in at $72.4 million to be adjusted as needed over those 5 years, we believe would take us to 92% of excess cost. Next issue is professional development, right underneath the table, and the state board is requesting, and the governor recommended, enhanced funding of $1.9 million. That would fully fund the program, and professional development is funded if school districts qualify, if they have an approved professional development plan on file with the state board, then they are reimbursed for 50% of their actual costs for professional development, or half of 1% of the general fund, whichever is appropriate. The additional 1.9 would fully fund the program. Currently, the appropriation is not fully funded. The amounts are actually a little bit lower than it is sometimes because of the federal money available through COVID-19. Some of that can be used for professional development costs. So some of districts' professional development costs are being covered by those federal funds rather than through state. The intent of the professional development, obviously, is to provide better trained teachers so that they're better able to meet the needs of our students and help them increase achievement. The other benefit that it provides, if teachers are better trained and better qualified, they're more likely to remain in the profession. And right now, as with everybody out there, retention of employees is an important issue. And on the other side of that page, you can see, again, historically, how it's been funded. When the program is not fully funded, by statute, we prorate the amount that's paid out. And so you can see the percentages there that it's been prorated over the last few years. And we estimate this year about 49%, next year about 48%. So more or less, districts will receive half of the entitlement. Underneath that is the Mental Health Intervention Team Pilot Program. The request and the recommendation from the governor was to add $3 million to the current funding, which would take it to $13,534,722. And that would allow us to expand the number of districts that are involved in the program. Currently, we have 66 districts. It has been expanding each year as revenue has been available. It has worked out quite well. I don't know if somebody's watching over or what, but the additional funding each year has been just enough to allow all the districts in that wanted to come in. So to date, it's worked well. And I give you a little background on how the program works. School districts hire a liaison to serve as a go-between. That's what a liaison is, between a community mental health center, the school, and the parents of the student that's receiving mental health services. And so it's an individual that can talk the language for all those different entities, because we all use different acronyms and different languages to describe what we do, and can help with scheduling, can help with understanding the needs both for school staff, for community mental health centers, what some of the issues are in schools, and particularly for parents. The program has been extremely beneficial for parents who don't have to take time to get their child to the community mental health center because the services can be provided in the school. It's beneficial for school districts to have a liaison that can talk to the community mental health center, so that we don't schedule the appointment every Wednesday at 11 o'clock, so we're always pulling him out of chemistry class. We can move that around and serve the students' academic needs as well as mental health needs a little bit better. The short version of all this, I would tell you, with the 66 districts, we have yet to have a district tell us, this hasn't been quite as good as I thought it would. They have nothing but positive things to say about their involvement in this program, and have testimony from students and families to verify that. And if you have any questions about it, the architect of the program is sitting among us back there. Representative Landwehr was instrumental, would be understating it, in the beginning of the program, and has continued to champion it as we've gone through. So thank you for what my thanks are worth. One thing this past year, it was put into the proviso last year that we would contract with an outside source to do an effectiveness study of the program. So we contracted with Wichita State University. They did a study of the program and made some recommendations. One of the issues we run into is the ability to release individual student data to outside sources because of the Student Data Privacy Act and because of FERPA at the federal level. But with that, they were still able to make some recommendations and some observations about the effectiveness of the program. The feedback they received from school liaisons, from parents, from students was very positive. And as a result, we are going to try to work with representatives of the participating school districts this summer to see if there's a way we can legally provide a little better data for our own purposes to determine the effectiveness of the program. So that's the Mental Health Intervention Team Pilot Program. The request is for an additional $3 million for next year that would allow us to expand the number of districts yet again. Mentor Teacher Program. Similar to professional development, if you have a mentor for your beginning teachers, they're much more likely to remain in the profession. And the purpose of the Mentor Teacher Program is to provide a mentor for every new teacher for the first 3 years they're in the profession. And that mentor has to be a teacher within the district who has been in that specific district for at least 3 years, has been selected by the local school board and determined to be an exemplary educator, and has been through training provided by the local district that meets standards set out by the State Board of Education. So the program, it has not been fully funded. The law states that the mentor will be paid $1,000 each year for each of the 3 years that they're serving as a mentor for that individual. To date, we haven't been able to pay $1,000 all 3 years. If you look on the next page, you'll see a table, again, tracking that history. And at the bottom, for instance, for FY 2023, you can see that the first-year mentors do receive the $1,000, and then it drops after that. Second year, $575, and the third year, $325. So the recommendation from the governor and the request that was made by the state board was for an additional $1 million, and we believe that would be enough to fully fund the program so that it would be $1,000 each year for 3 years. And that would allow mentors to provide probationary teachers with the professional support, with the assistance they need, and again, helping with recruiting and retaining teachers. I'll leave it there for now on that one. Next page, Safe and Secure Schools grants. Safe and Secure Schools grant was funded last year for $5 million. The funding that was appropriated for next year was $4 million. And due to some changes in the federal funds that are available, it's dropped to $4 million. So the request by the state board and the governor's recommendation was to add $1 million so that it stays at the $5 million amount. The request from school districts last summer to participate in this grant totaled about $11 million. And we had 5 to distribute, so we distributed on a per pupil basis. We had 157 districts involved, and I will tell you frankly, some districts don't apply because they know the money won't go as far as they need it to, and on a per pupil basis, it won't cover what they need to do. The grant is a match, so the school district matches dollar for dollar whatever they receive in the grant to provide for school safety. In past years, the grant has been targeted towards entrances, making those secure, whether that's through better locks, through better video systems at the door, anything that can harden the entrances is the terminology that's used. The primary request we get from school districts now is for improvements in communication, to be able to communicate with their local law enforcement, with their local emergency managers, and that has not been funded by the grant before, so we made a request that that language be added. That is one of the safety standards that have been adopted by the State Board of Education, and the governor's recommendation was to include that language in the bill. Last year, for the first time, the appropriation did allow school districts to hire new school resource officers if they chose to use the money that way, and some did. So the request is for $1 million so that we can keep the grant amount at $5 million total for the coming year. Parents as Teachers program, the state board requested and the governor recommended $1,300,337, and that is from the Children's Initiative Fund rather than from the state general fund. It's based on recommendations that were made to the state board by the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund, and the intention is that that will allow the existing providers to keep up with rising costs. That may not allow for an additional number of families, depending on how much costs rise, but it would keep them from losing the number of students that are currently served. And if you look at the table in the middle of that page, you can see that the number of children served has been declining as costs have increased. We've been able to provide service to fewer children. So the additional request for $1.3 million would at least stop the slide at that point. The other items to be covered are other recommendations made in the governor's budget, not necessarily recommended by the State Board of Education, not that they're opposed, that just wasn't a part of their recommendation. And the first one is what JG discussed with you about the capital improvement state aid transfer. The governor's recommendation was to revert that to a demand transfer rather than the revenue transfer that it's been for the last few years. Incidentally, the purpose of making that a demand transfer is it helps to prevent any school district from defaulting on a capital improvement payment, bond and interest payment, which has an effect on the entire state if one entity would default on that. Next issue was a high-density at-risk weighting. That's currently set to sunset on July 1 of 2024. The governor recommended that be extended for 1 year to 2025, and KSDE supports that recommendation. There are some miscellaneous budget issues, miscellaneous being in the eye of the beholder, I'm sure. The 20 mil property tax levy is set for 2 years at a time, and that is set to expire this year. And if it does, that's a pretty significant revenue source that the state would need to make up in the general fund for school districts. So the recommendation would be that the legislature would reauthorize the 20 mil property tax levy for the general fund for FY24 and FY25. That's one of those steps that has to be taken every 2 years. KSDE has a statewide longitudinal data system grant that is helping fund creation of just what I said, an SLDS system, student data system. It will update what we have so that we can do, in my terms, real-time collection of data and reporting back to school districts rather than just collecting data at a specific time during the year, and then it might be 3 months before school districts get the results back. It's a little hard to impact instruction and improvement for students if you've got that kind of a lag time on some of the data that you receive. This allows us to do it, like I say, in real time. A true technology person would tell me this is not real time, but it's pretty close. The point to be made is we're not collecting any more data than we are now. We only collect that data that's required to be collected. This just makes us more efficient in it and helps school districts be more efficient and more effective with it. Also would make it easier for us to provide the reports that we're required to the legislature, to the public, back to school districts. There is a fee, an annual fee to host the data system of $110,000. Existing funds will cover that for a few years, but kind of a preview of coming attractions, if you will. By 25 or 2026, that may need to be a part of our budget request to be able to continue hosting that program or that data in a safe format and system. And then the final item we have, I'm actually going to turn over to John Hess to go over the COVID-19 expenditures, if that's all right, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. John Hess, the Director of Fiscal Services and Operations for the Kansas State Department of Education. So on the last couple pages of your testimony, you'll see a table, kind of hard to read. I apologize for it. I had to take a picture of it and input it into there instead of actually manually typing it in there. But those are the COVID expenditures that were included in our agency's budget submission in the fall. And I would note, if you want to see a probably more legible version of that, that budget submission is posted on KSDE's website, so you can find the PDF version of it there as well. So just a couple high points. In fiscal year 23, the agency estimated $496.2 million in COVID-19 expenditures, and that goes down to $413.3 million in fiscal year 24. And then we have a handful of major contracts that, if you have questions about them, I'm happy to provide more information for. But I would also note that those numbers don't include funds that the agency has received from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund through either legislative appropriations or the SPARK process, or some other funds that the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund has received as subawards from the Department for Children and Families for the children from the CCDF, which is Care Development Block Grant. Yes, there we go. Thank you. But with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for any questions on COVID-19.
All right, thank you, Craig and John. So what we're going to do, committee, in our questions, we're going to try to do it a little bit more organized by section. And so if you have questions by section, we'll do it that way, so we have all of our questions in one particular area. So let's go ahead and look at the handout on the enhancements that are provided on the first page. And then let's turn to, might as well take them section at a time. Are there any questions about the special education enhancement? No questions? We've had a lot of discussion on special education and we'll continue to, okay. Are there any questions about the professional development enhancement? Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It didn't really get touched of why ag in the classroom got dropped in the governor's recommendations.
There were two recommendations from the state board that were not included in the governor's recommendation. One was ag in the classroom, the other was environmental education. Both recommendations from the state board were for $35,000 for each of those programs to help with the funding. I can't speak for the governor's recommendations why they were not included.
Those programs are still active, are they, at this point? Okay. So it would be the elimination of those programs if they were not funded?
No, they have other funding sources.
Okay.
Are you on professional development?
I had another special ed.
Okay, we'll go back to special ed and then we'll go back to professional development.
I want to just be clear on the special ed. It shows an increase of 72 million for 5 years. That actually accumulates each year, does it not? So it's really over $1 billion over the span of 5 years.
It does accumulate each year, and that may be very well what the math adds up to.
Thank you.
Questions on professional development? All right, so I do have a question on professional development. So in terms of how many hours on average, or what does the state board require in professional development hours, or do they? For teachers, just regular teachers.
I'm going to be proven wrong when I say this. I don't believe the state board has requirements for professional development. There are requirements for professional development over a certain time period in order to renew your teaching license. And that depending on how the teacher approaches it, that can be from graduate hours in college or from professional development time. But as far as annual professional development, some of those requirements are in statute. I don't know that the state board has specific requirements themselves.
Okay, interesting you brought that up. Now, the PDC, the professional development programs, the points that you get to renew your license, I wasn't even thinking about that as being part of this. I was thinking about the professional development that's required when teachers have an in-service day. So you're saying it's actually both?
That's a local decision, a local board decision about how many hours to have, with some exceptions. There are trainings required that have been put in statute over the years, and but as far as a state board requirement of how much time or how many days, that's a local school board decision, and is typically negotiated because that becomes terms and conditions of employment for teachers.
Okay, and then you said, on the enhancement, it says would fully fund the program for professional development. What do you mean fully fund? Is that in statute?
Yes, the statute says that a school district will be reimbursed at the end of the year 50% of what they spent on professional development, or 1/2 of 1% of their general fund. And to fully fund that, we think the additional $1.9 million would do that.
I apologize. And just my last question is, we had a informational hearing on teachers, and teachers, the heart of education. And one of the things that in talking to teachers one-on-one and was also brought up is professional development, just so much more professional development. I think that may be one of the top 5 complaints is professional development, especially professional development that doesn't necessarily relate to their content area or their age area. So with that in mind, has Kansas Department of Education, the State Board of Education, taken a hard look at trying to take the exhaustion from teachers that we are hearing? And that is one of them. And you're asking for more funding, so I was just curious.
The state board doesn't have professional development requirements.
Right, have you not heard, have you guys don't survey, talk to your teachers to find out where their issues are?
Certainly, they've talked, state board and State Department has talked with teachers, but not a specific survey on that topic.
Okay, and I do understand that we are saying that no matter what the expenditures are, we will pay up to 50%. But I did mention, committee, that I'd like to, at some point, obviously not in this session, take a look at where we are placing requirements on teachers too, and strike those. And that would be one area in which, you know, maybe we don't have an endless lid on that, because, and maybe that's something we need to really find out about from our teachers. How helpful is professional development other than licensure, of course? And I think that we do require from the state legislature in some places specific types of professional development on certain content. So, okay.
Suicide prevention, for instance.
Suicide prevention, is that the only one?
No.
Do you happen to know?
We've got a list that we can get to.
Okay, great. Any other questions, professional development? All right, next item is the mental health pilot program. We've got the resident expert right here, and I know she's got a bill. Anything you'd like to say? Representative Landwehr.
That it's time for it to be in bill form rather than sitting in a proviso in the budget every year. And I think that Craig and our CMHCs and their folks have done a pretty good job working on that. So we're hoping to get that wrapped up here soon. It's been a tough bill to put together. And we'll introduce it through appropriations and see where it goes from there. Otherwise, I would highly recommend it. We keep it in the budget.
All right, any questions about the mental health? All right, to our next one, mentor teacher program. Questions on that item? Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question. So the teachers that signed up for the 3-year mentorship, were they promised $1,000 every year and they just did it anyway for less? Is that how it worked out, or?
I don't know that I could say promise, but yes, they did it for less.
Wow, thank you, teachers.
Well, and to know, I think that we should follow through as well, but schools aren't prohibited from paying that. So in those, some cases, that may be the case. Do we know, Craig?
In some cases, yes, that is the case. I can't tell you how many, though.
It's a small amount to pay for teachers that are mentoring. And so do we know how many new teachers? It looks like that this would fund about 2,300 mentor partners or mentors. So how many new teachers a year do we have?
You could not quite divide that by 3 because they tend to lower a little bit. We'll have more in the first year than we have in the second year than we have in the third year. So
But how many
800 or so.
annually do we have that are coming in fresh out of school? I forgot that number. We had the K-bore sheet, if anybody has, darn,
on
if we
these
had
estimates,
somebody photographic
somewhere in
memory
your
would
800,
know. Do you think it's around 2,000 or so?
I don't know if it would be that, I shouldn't say.
Okay,
Some of them that come in new are not fresh out of school. So
sure, they're not, but they would still qualify for the program.
yes, if they are a new teacher, they can qualify for the program.
And so on that note, does that mean that every school district participates that and every new teacher has that opportunity? Or is it something where some districts really participate and train and some don't? And some new teachers want to be part of it and some don't? What's the deciding factor and who participates and who doesn't?
The local district has to agree to participate and provide the training for the teacher. And then it's the mentor has to be assigned by the local school board. Trying to think what other qualifications I'm missing. I believe that's the primary issues.
So how many districts?
And each district sets up their criteria for the mentor as far as, does it have to be somebody in the same building? Does it have to be somebody in the same teaching assignment and so forth? Depends on the size of the district, how feasible some of that is.
And based on your request, how many districts are currently using it?
I'll get that for you. Rather than give you my guess.
Okay, if districts actually use the program and the teachers were able to have the time that they needed to mentor properly, I think that's a really worthy thing considering everything that we've heard from our teachers. The only thing I would say also is I think you referenced that fully fund the mentor program. Is that also in statute that there's no cap, no limit on that? We're just to pay $1,000 for 3 years for as many that want to do it?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. All right. Committee, the next item, safe and secure school grants. Okay, on safe and secure, it looks like technology is included, correct?
Technology for locking systems, yes.
And did you say something about you wanted an expanded technology?
School districts want to be able to use it for communication systems, so they can talk with emergency management, police officers will tell you often, once you get inside a school building, their radios go dead, just because of the structure of the facility. You can put repeaters in that fix that problem, but those are a little bit expensive.
And current legislation doesn't allow for that?
The way the proviso has been written, that is one of the standards that the state board has adopted, but the proviso has always specified for safety at entrances. And like I said, last year, then the school resource officers were added. So if you just expand the proviso language to include communications, they'd be good.
Representative Landwehr.
Well, and I think it got tightened down because we had a school district that may have bought things that they shouldn't have bought under this money the first year that we did it. And so I think, Madam Chair, if we want to take and revisit what that is, I don't have a problem with it, but that's why we tightened it down. Because I want to say it was, one of them happened to be defibrillators and another was, I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't for the safety of keeping the kids safe in the school.
On that note, I would add, it's like most of the other programs we have, we do audit what they spend, so how they spent it and if it matched what they put in the grant.
We just didn't have it tightened down that first year that we put that money out there. So
Now, the legislature doesn't ask a lot specifically from our teachers, but we do ask a lot from the Department of Education, and Craig knows that very well because we're always emailing him. But on that note, there are various reports that you provide back to the legislature at the beginning of the year. This is one of those reports. Did we receive that report? I'm sure we probably did.
I would say yes, but I don't recall specifically.
Okay, because we've had some turnover, would you mind having Sherry send that report back? And that way we can look at the list and see who took advantage of it. I do remember last year when we were working this in conference committee that I think there was some surprise from the executive branch that it would be used. And it sounds like all of it was used. Yeah. And so we tried to use ESSER funds or ARPA monies as much as possible, and we were able to negotiate $1 million of that. So that would be up again. All right. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have any idea about how many school resource officers came in due to this, or how many districts took advantage of that?
Yes, we would have that information.
Okay, I would like that.
Okay.
A little side bit, JG, you want to tell everyone what you told me? Kind of moving back real quick to the mentor.
The total number of teachers that were graduated were 5,461. Of those, if I can get my computer, 1,801 were licensed in Kansas.
Okay. So we'll still probably want to know exactly how that translates to jobs in Kansas. So, other questions on this one, this item? Okay, I do have a quick question because it happened in my district. One of the districts I serve in my house district, there was a kidnapping, and what happened, we've heard in other states concerning serious situations. A lot of times it's procedural problems. Doors are propped open. How do your 2 FTEs that we provided for several years ago, I think it was 2018 when we passed this, how do they help schools go over their plans and make sure they're actually applying and implementing their plans? And is that, just give us a quick update on that.
They provide training for school districts on here's the best practices. When they apply for the grant, they have to send their plan in, and we review the plan before they receive the grant. So that's it.
Okay, so it's really only for those that are receiving new money. If you already have money, there's no one reviewing your plan. It's just recommended?
Correct. At the current time, that's the process.
Something to keep in mind, committee. There's no necessarily way to hold accountable, but local governments can, local school boards can if they're thinking through it all. But a lot of times this could be just something that you miss. All right, committee, next item, parents as teachers. Everybody's so quiet today. How many school districts take advantage of this program?
Should know that, and I don't remember. May I phone a friend?
Yes.
You know,
Welcome.
Madam Chair, Melissa Rooker, the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet. The information, I'm pulling up our annual report. I'm not sure we track it's a pass-through that comes out of the CIF, so it originates as tobacco funding. It's part of a line item in the CIF budget, and we transfer it to the state agency for the state level Parents as Teachers program. I'm looking at our annual report because we do include data. So, and this is, our report is publicly available at kschildrenscabinet.org. We reported in December that, I can tell you that 7,517 children were served. Most of those, 6,540 were prenatal to age 3. 977 were age 3 to 5. There were 50,412 personal visits that took place. 48% of the families report, we gather information from the families
Do
about.
have that.
Yeah,
but
I don't know that we are not responsible for administering through the school districts, is what I'm saying. We fund the State Parents as Teachers Association.
Okay. I'm just curious, raise your hand if you have a school in your district that uses parents as teachers. Okay, most of you do. No, they actually have a program. It's just not a program that's really available in my area where,
Madam Chair, I used the Lifeline. John said that in the budget, it reflects 170 school districts.
Okay,
have the program.
good.
So, thank you.
and I guess the only other thing on that is I always wanted it to be means tested. And it's one of those programs that anybody can use. If you're a millionaire, you can use the services. Go ahead, Representative, well, you were a representative.
Part of it was funded through TANF and was means tested, and it created more problems. There is value to universally accessible programs. There are other forms of home visiting that are more prescriptive and more targeted and have various criteria, but I think there's value. I think it's part of why Parents as Teachers is so well-loved, is that it is open and available to any family. The idea is every family would benefit from it, and a lot of us as first-time parents did not know quite what to do when we left the hospital with that newborn, and it's programs like this that are tremendous sources of support for new families as a resource. So that would be, there is from times past some means testing that went on, and I think it was a bit problematic, restrictive in its own way.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And I would agree, there are some programs that are universally accessible programs that are good for everyone. All right. Agriculture in the classroom, I think we had a question on that. We can get some more information perhaps and find why that wasn't funded, and maybe even, Craig, do you have anything else on that particular one? Okay. And
If you had questions, I'm ready.
okay, yes, yeah, come on up. And the environment and education, that one, neither. Anything else in the testimony here that you would like to talk about? Wow, all right. Well, thank you. Okay, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I had to remember where I was at. Under the miscellaneous, the high-density at-risk waiting to extend the sunset to 2025. Can you remind me what the reasoning was behind putting a sunset on that? Because it seems like since there's been a sunset, we've extended it. And I know that some things in the State House, the sun never sets on, and others, they apparently do.
I can't tell you the reason for the sunset. I can tell you it became a part of the statute when the provision was added that would allow districts to receive high-density at-risk weighting based on the free lunch percentage in an individual school, rather than having to qualify for the entire district. Whether that had anything to do with the decision or not, I don't know, but that's the time it went in.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I'm glad you brought that up. High density, it did jump up from about 45 million, 50 million to almost 72 million in 2023.
Yes, that's still an unaudited number, so it'll be a little lower than that, but it's going to be in that ballpark.
And it seems like a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, there were criteria, there were things that districts that were receiving high density at-risk weighting had to do. They had to show that their subgroups were showing improvement. Is that right?
A number of years ago, yes. The requirement now is that the practices being used for high density at risk have to meet the evidence-based best practices requirements. And if not, for a specific number of years, if they don't meet that, then the money is no longer paid to that district.
So as long as they're, I remember we worked worked with you, the KSDE, on a list and trying to provide, acceptable best practices. So as long as they use items from that acceptable best practices, there does not have to be an improvement in subgroups as there was prior. Correct. I don't know why we took that out. Well, anyway, all right. Any other questions for the good of the testimony? All right, thank you very much. Committee, we also have testimony here from the children, the Children's Cabinet. And Melissa, if you'd like to come on up, she's provided testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see lots of new faces around the committee table. So the first portion of the testimony is just a little bit of background about the Children's Cabinet itself. We are organized via state statute to be the entity that conducts a series of services that are outlined on page 1 of the testimony, so I won't read through them. We manage the funds that are in what's known as the Children's Initiative Fund, which receives an annual transfer out of the Kansas Endowment for Youth. The Kansas Endowment for Youth is funded through the Master Tobacco Settlement Annuity, which lands there. And then the legislature reviews and approves the budget every year for the CIF. We, as an organization, have a governing board. It is made up of 9 voting members. 5 are gubernatorial appointees. No more than 3 may be from a single political party. They have staggered terms. They all serve 4-year terms, but it is a staggered timeline so that we do not have the board turnover all at once when there's a change of administration. We also have 4 voting members who are legislative appointments, so the typical speaker, Senate president, and both minority leaders have appointments. So it's a very balanced approach to the work we do. That board, we have worked very hard in my tenure to get our budget timeline aligned with the legislative process. So we have a June meeting for cabinet budget recommendations. Our recommendations then have to go through the process at the state board and be accepted and incorporated into the KSDE budget for presentation through the process in this manner. This year, the recommendations involve, the cabinet opted to ask for an increased transfer out of the key fund into the CIF for a couple specific reasons. One is to enhance the grant-making capacity that we have with the one program that the cabinet controls, which is known as the Early Childhood Block Grant Fund. So we issue a competitive RFP and review applications, and the cabinet in April votes on tentative awards, waiting for the final budget approval for the next fiscal year. But those are all meant to be partnerships with community level organizations so that there is additional effort that the local communities provide via other matching funds and in-kind contributions and that sort of thing. We also, so we wanted to enhance the amount of grant funding available to help meet ever-increasing needs. We made the request, and we originated the request for the Parents as Teachers enhancement, as we are charged with an annual evaluation process. And what we were noticing was the slide in the number of children served, and we did some work to try and find out what was causing that, and it was the effect of inflation on their program. So it had been several years since they had seen an increase. So the board opted to make that recommendation. We also are the statewide lead for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library Project. You all were good enough to approve a new line item for us last year for that program. It's tobacco funding that is funding the state share of the program. So it's a 50% match to local programs that are 501c3 nonprofits. So this is a true public-private partnership. We are growing the program as we work to make sure that every county in the state is covered, and we are tracking expenses and will need additional capacity in that program. And then there is a small increase to the SIDS network, the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Network, just again to help them adjust for some inflation costs. And then there was another line item in our budget that was added last year, and unlike some of the other line items, it does not reappropriate unused funds back into our CIF budget. And since they originate as tobacco funds, we are requesting the language necessary so that line item reappropriates and can be put to use to help with the programs that we operate. I think, let me look at my budget recommendations. I think I caught everything. And I will stand for any questions this committee has.
All right, thank you. Questions? No questions on CIF? All right, great. Thank you very much. Committee, we did a great job today. I think this is our good introduction to our big budget. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a great evening.